is Nightline. Tonight, chaos. Pro-Trump agitators storming the Capitol, clashing with police, breaching the chambers of democracy, waving symbols of hate, inspired by a president unwilling to concede defeat.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
Plus, inside the descent into violence.
Everybody stay down!
All this as the joint session of Congress tried to certify President-elect Joe Biden's victory. How were rioters able to break into one of the most heavily guarded buildings in America? And not giving in to fear, what lawmakers have to say when they return to the floor.
Nightline, Capitol under siege. We'll be right back. So glad you could join us. I'm Juju Chang.
I'm Byron Pitts. Tonight, dramatic images at the U.S. Capitol building, where just today, it was the scene of one of the darkest days in American history, a failed insurrection.
Byron, it was a sea of lawlessness incited by the president, storming the halls of Congress. Tonight, lawmakers returning to the floor to certify President-elect Joe Biden's victory. For the very latest, we go straight to ABC's Rachel Scott reporting from just outside the Capitol. Rachel, you witnessed the mayhem and the bloodshed at the Capitol today. Walk us through the day from the president's speech to the protesters to how quickly it turned violent.
Well, Juju, this really was a final stand for the president. You saw him address his supporters, making it clear that he will not concede. They wanted to take up that fight, so we saw thousands of them march right here to the steps of the U.S. Capitol. Calm and then chaos and violence. They stormed from all sides, smashing in windows, pushing past the Capitol guards to get inside of that Capitol, get to the Senate floor. Lawmakers were huddled under their desks. Outside, we were hearing chants of "Fight for Trump." One woman tonight lost her life, and we watched as she was wheeled out onto a stretcher, gushing out blood from a wound that looked like it appeared to be in her neck. We did not know her condition. Later on, Juju, we found out that she unfortunately lost her life.
It's been a long day of reporting for you, Rachel Scott. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe.
Thanks, Juju.
Our nation's capital on edge tonight, where we're just 2 weeks away from Joe Biden being sworn in as the 46th president of the United States. And yet it's on those very steps where he'll take the oath of office where chaos broke out today. Insurrection and chaos at the U.S. Capitol. An attempted overthrow of democracy like we've never seen in American history.
They broke the glass.
Sheer terror as lawmakers duck and cover. While a violent pro-Trump mob stormed the seat of the U.S. government.
It's a horrifying day for America. Bloodshed, mob, violence, fear among the people's elected representatives doing the people's business that they might be killed. Tear gas wafting through the chamber of the House of Representatives. It could not have been a greater contrast and a greater tragedy for that Constitution.
Shots fired inside the House chamber.
I don't know about the fire.
Doors and windows bashed in.
Truly no words to describe the scene happening behind me here as Trump supporters have taken over the West Lawn here.
All this happening as the U.S. Congress is supposed to be certifying President-elect Joe Biden's victory.
Threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest. It's insurrection.
When the day dawned in D.C., the nation expected a very different kind of drama to play out.
Today was supposed to be one of those days in the democratic process that we don't even notice. This is the verdict of our people. And then the Congress counts them.
By mid-morning, thousands of Trump supporters were gathering for a Save America march, not far from the White House, there to protest President Trump's November election defeat, just 14 days before Joe Biden's inauguration. Trump's family appeared first, drumming up the crowd with incendiary rhetoric.
This is Donald Trump's Republican Party.
We are in this fight to the bitter end. We are going to take our country back.
At noon, the president took the stage, further fueling the fire of anger and dissent.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
He called on Congress to reject the election results, an election he lost by 7 million votes, but continues to call rigged despite no evidence.
We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol. You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
Madam Speaker, the Vice President and the United States Senate.
By 1 o'clock, the much-anticipated joint session of Congress got underway.
When we got to the state of Arizona, a Republican member of Congress named Paul Gosar stood up to object.
That objection forcing the House and Senate to separate and debate. Over on the Senate side, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell bluntly confronting his Republican colleagues.
The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever.
As debate continued inside, outside, President Trump supporters arriving, and the mood distinctly changes. Demonstrators soon climbing the walls and scaffolding, violently confronting law enforcement.
It was clear that the crowd was intent on causing harm to our officers by deploying chemical irritants on police.
While inside, the vice president was whisked away by the Secret Service. As the mob moved in, the entire Capitol went into lockdown. But protesters were already inside, some carrying Confederate flags. Law enforcement was no match for the sheer size of the invasion. Officers forced to retreat. In the House chamber, lawmakers huddled in the balcony as armed security barricaded the door. At one point, shots fired. A protester hit. She eventually dies.
They brought out a woman on a stretcher, rushed her inside. We did see blood gushing.
And there's now smoke coming from over by the House gallery.
For hours, while his supporters rampaged through the Capitol, breaking onto the Senate floor, into Nancy Pelosi's office, the president said nothing. By 4 o'clock, President-elect Biden publicly called on Trump to stop the mob.
I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege.
Just minutes later, Trump released a video statement full of lies about the election.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us, but you have to go home now. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special.
We love you. You are special. Those were the words of the president about the people that had just stormed the Capitol building. So a very strange turn of events.
The video taken down from all social media sites as the president continues to refuse to condemn the actions of his supporters.
This is on him. It's completely on him, on his broken psychology. Most grown-ups understand that you don't win them all, and at some point you have to learn to lose.
By 5 o'clock, law enforcement starts reclaiming control of some parts of the Capitol grounds. Multiple sources telling ABC News President Trump repeatedly refused to send in the National Guard before finally agreeing in the late afternoon. An hour later, a citywide curfew goes into effect with threats that demonstrators who don't leave will be arrested.
Let's get back to work.
Despite the danger all around, lawmakers took back the floor.
The United States Senate will not be intimidated.
We will begin the hard work of repairing this nation tonight, because here in America, we do hard things. In America, we always overcome our challenges.
Returning to work, determined to finish the democratic process. And when we come back, we'll hear from eyewitnesses caught up in the chaos.
The U.S. Capitol today descending into chaos as a mob of pro-Trump supporters stormed in. This breach in security now sparking serious questions. How did this happen? Earlier, I spoke with ABC News Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas. Pierre, we knew that there could be trouble today. Law enforcement knew that. There was intel about that. Why was law enforcement so unprepared?
The bottom line is that there was concern that there could be violence, and the fact that those protesters, rioters, were so easily able to breach those initial barriers outside of the Capitol, then use chemical irritants, and then make their way to the Capitol building and force their way in. Usually they have so many law enforcement officials available and visible that people know not to try anything. That didn't happen today, and there will be lots of investigations going forward to see why this happened.
How are they able to finally get it under control, and what happens next from a law enforcement perspective?
Sheer manpower, Byron. At the end of the day, we had over 1,200 D.C. National Guard sent to the scene, hundreds of federal law enforcement officials sent to the scene. So they simply built up the numbers, got control of the building, and then proceeded to move around the Capitol to force the people out.
Thank you, Pierre. And to further break down this question about security, I'm joined by Brad Garrett, former FBI agent and ABC News contributor, and Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. And Brad, first question to you. Police knew that President Trump's staunchest supporters would be protesting in Washington, yet the Capitol was overtaken. What went wrong, and what did law enforcement seem so off guard?
Completely off guard, Byron, in developing some sort of outward perimeter with force. In other words, National Guard, or a tremendous number of uniformed officers, to never allow the protesters to actually get physically to the Capitol. I would say the ellipse, which should have been the furthest, and that's really where the problem started. So they had the intel. Why they weren't there remains to be seen.
And Jonathan, at this point, what can you tell us about the groups of protesters who were there? Do you consider them domestic terrorists, and if so, why?
Well, this was a dark day for democracy. Our country has withstood all kinds of challenges, but never before seen an act of domestic terror perpetrated in the capital of our country. It was a who's who today of right-wing extremists, from members of the Proud Boys to the Oath Keepers, other armed militia groups, the Groyper Nation, and many other, some of the worst elements of society. You know, honestly, this was a bit of a bookend from Charlottesville to Capitol Hill, where you had white supremacists out in the open, shattering norms and really desecrating some of the most important symbols of our country.
Brad, some were questioning the speed at which law enforcement officials responded to the security breach. And ABC News is reporting the president's advisors urged him to call the National Guard right away, but he refused. What do you make of that?
I make of that he didn't want the presence of the military when people are going to the Capitol that support him. In other words, he wanted it to be open for them to literally go to the Capitol, not thinking about security or anything else. And let's face it, the Capitol Police had to deal with the security physically of Congress members, and I think that's why you saw them retreat to deal with that.
Jonathan, last question to you. President Trump leaves office in just a couple of weeks. Do you worry that these hate groups are now emboldened more than ever?
These hate groups have been emboldened since the day President Trump took office and spoke about American carnage in front of the Capitol. And we know that it's likely to get worse, not better. Tonight, there was an attack on Governor Inslee's home in the state of Washington. This itself followed the attempt to overtake the Michigan state capitol in Lansing, attempted plots to kidnap the governor of Michigan, the governor of Virginia. Look, we should recognize that right-wing extremism didn't start with President Trump, but he has amplified and expanded the issue dramatically. It's going to take the Biden administration to work incredibly hard to tackle this issue and finally wrestle it to the ground.
Gentlemen, as you've both said, a dark day for America. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Coming up, how we got here.
President Trump has maintained a steady drumbeat of false claims that he somehow won the election. Now we look back at the moments that led to the attack we saw on the Capitol today. ABC's Deborah Roberts has the story.
We have breaking news results from the state of Pennsylvania. Those results are in right now, and based on what we are seeing there, we can say that Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. is on track to win the state of Pennsylvania, become the 46th president of the United States.
The president's attack against the integrity of the election started right on election night as his early lead in the swing states began to erode, tweeting, "We are up big, but they're trying to steal the election." The allegations of widespread voter fraud coming even as the votes were still being counted.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning.
And the president's supporters quickly responding, rallying in Detroit, demanding that officials stop the count. 4 days after the election, Pennsylvania's results push Joe Biden into the win column. He is the president-elect.
It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric.
But the current president refusing to accept defeat, his legal team getting to work, filing multiple lawsuits.
These lawsuits will be brought starting on Monday.
With lawsuit after lawsuit failing, Team Trump begins pushing for Republican state officials to overturn the voters' choice and appoint Trump's electors instead of Biden's.
If it was happening in another country, you know exactly what you'd call it. You'd call it a coup.
When the president strikes out in changing the outcomes in Pennsylvania and Arizona, he turns up the heat on Georgia officials, tweeting, "Why won't the hapless governor of Georgia use his emergency powers to overrule his obstinate Secretary of State? Georgia Republicans are angry. All Republicans are angry. Get it done." State officials blame the constant barrage of attacks for death threats against them and their families.
Mr. President, it looks like you likely lost the state of Georgia. Stop inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence.
But you can't ever accept when they steal and rig and rob. You can't accept.
Biden will never be our president, ever.
Nah.
Never.
We're not settling for a loss here. Too much cheek.
Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania all certify their votes declaring Joe Biden the winner.
There's no way this could have happened other than the obvious cheating or a rigged election. There's no way it could have happened.
And when the U.S. Supreme Court declines to listen to his appeals, President Trump takes to Twitter. "We have just begun to fight," he writes, calling the ruling a disgraceful miscarriage of justice. Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there. Will be wild, he declared.
Democrat officials in the key swing states illegally violated their own state laws in order to enable, encourage, and facilitate fraud on a scale never before seen in the history of our country.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
We're going to keep fighting until every illegal vote is thrown out.
And just after the new year, a stunning move. The president phoning Georgia's Secretary of State.
We won the election, and it's not fair to take it away from us like this.
Urging him to find enough votes to make him the victor.
Look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Just this week, in a final-ditch effort, President Trump calling his top lieutenant, Vice President Mike Pence, to somehow not certify the Electoral College votes.
And I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, I have to tell you. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
And today, his supporters arrive at the Capitol in full force for that rally.
Our thanks to Deb Roberts. And when we come back, eyewitnesses to a failed insurrection. Welcome back. Stunning images from the Capitol today, breached for the first time in more than 200 years. Earlier this evening, I spoke with a group of folks who witnessed the pandemonium up close. all caught in the melee when the Capitol went under lockdown.
We thought it was going to be a sleepy day. This is largely a ceremonial, tradition that happens every 4 years. We thought it would go until midnight, but nothing like this.
Election Certification Day, a largely symbolic day that usually passes quietly. I want to start with this tweet that you sent out this morning. What was going through your mind in that photo, and how quickly did that descend into mayhem?
I was thinking about the oath I took to the Constitution and to make sure that we follow through in ratifying the Electoral College, which is a reflection of the will of the people, and how privileged I was and honored I was to participate in this very historic moment. Little known to me were the events that were about to happen. I had thought that the rhetoric would potentially lead to violence, not just in the Capitol, but throughout our country. But it really never hits home until it really hits home.
Congressman Raul Ruiz of California and Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, both inside the Capitol.
I was sitting in the Senate chamber listening to a speech, and all of a sudden I heard someone say the Capitol had been breached. And you look around, and I look up, and Pence is no longer there. And all this happening just like that, people stood up as if we were to evacuate. I'm standing there, and the sergeant at arms goes to the dais, and he says, "Stop, everybody stay in place. There are those who've breached the Capitol."
Finally, they shut the doors, locked them, interrupted, and said, "Prepare to take cover and get under your seats, and take out the gas masks because there's tear gas outside."
And then utter chaos.
It is un-American, period. They should stop, period. This is about our country. It is not about hooligans.
My blood's boiling. This is an assault upon our democracy. This isn't peaceful protesting. This is sedition.
Huffington Post journalist Igor Bobik capturing this video. Sure, you're separated by the video that you're taking, and you're in reporter mode, no doubt. But what was going through your mind as this mob is storming the building that you're in?
Just an incredible moment. I have never seen anything like this. Record everything, because it was literally history being made. I did not see shots fired. I saw gas canisters fired outside the Senate chamber itself. You could hear these loud booms outside. The Capitol Police firing these canisters off. Inside the chamber.
What was going through your mind as you were literally evacuating the halls of Congress?
I was incredibly angry. These are people who are trying to make an assault upon a democracy that is supposed to be a shining city on a hill.
And did you ever feel like your safety was at risk?
I never felt like my safety was at risk. I could see them down the hallway, but the Capitol Police and the security were there. You don't feel fear. You feel a sense of anger. And I felt anger more than anything else.
Because you felt that democracy was under attack.
This is our constitutional process of a peaceful transition of power, and this was a deliberate attempt to interrupt that peaceful, constitutionally mandated transfer of power. Any American should be angry about that.
33-year-old Corey Thornton is a business owner from Des Moines, Iowa. He drove 16 hours straight to attend the rally today. His message: the government has forgotten the people it's supposed to serve. Protesters wearing body armor and breaking into elected officials' offices, they were, seen breaking into the elected officials' offices. I'm sure you own a cell phone. You must have seen the scenes playing out. And so I'm curious what you saw firsthand. What was your final reaction as you were driving away from the Capitol today? Do you feel like what you did today was good for the country?
I believe what I did today was good for the country. I believe what a lot of other people did today was good for the country. I don't believe in the violence that took place today. Moving away from the Capitol, there's a lot of time to reflect on the good and the bad. And bottom line is we need to come together as a country. We're not two Americas, we're one America.
But for Senator Cassidy, a longtime supporter of the president, it came down to country over party. You are, I think it's fair to say, a staunch Republican, supporter of President Trump, voting with him. 90% is your voting record. How much of what happened today can be blamed on President Trump's refusal to accept the election results?
Clearly, the president stirred up the crowd, and people came here thinking that they could change the results of the election through the Electoral College process. That is wrong. That is a misunderstanding of the process. Anyone who contributed to that misunderstanding duped these poor people.
And I understand that you tweeted both as you were leaving the Capitol, but also later at President Trump, urging him to condemn the violence and tell people to disband.
No one speaks to this crowd like President Trump does. And leadership should have to look at a situation where we see that it's not going the way it should and speak, as only he can, that without qualification, without justification, with no equivocation, that this has to stop. It is wrong. There is no excuse for it. It's a crime, and it will be prosecuted.
History will remember this day with rebuke and scorn. Well, they will look back and see how fragile our democracy can be, but at the same time, how if we focus on the higher good of our democracy and the will of the people and follow the rules set forth in our Constitution, that we are strong.
Witnesses to an unprecedented day that Senator Chuck Schumer says will be remembered as a day of infamy. When we come back, what sparked the chaos in the Capitol today? Our political powerhouse team breaking it down. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Today's unprecedented scene at the Capitol, a result of long simmering tensions finally boiling over. Earlier this evening, I spoke to ABC News contributor LZ Granderson, former U.S. Senator Heidi Heitkamp, and ABC News contributor Tara Setmeyer. And LZ, I'll start with you. Today's violence was years in the making. How would you describe today? A protest, insurrection, or an attempted coup? And how do we get here?
It was an attempted coup. And we got here through a lot of different routes. I know it's fashionable to blame everything on President Trump. He's an easy target. He's a loud target. But the truth is, he's not the only target. In this current administration, he's had a lot of people complicit, a lot of people supporting him, a lot of people who knew better but didn't do better. But again, this isn't something that started with his administration. This is an essential part of the American condition. And I don't mean that lightly, and I don't mean that to be cynical, but you can go through decade after decade after decade since the Pilgrims landed on this country, on this land, and find examples in which you will see uprisings of white people being handled differently than the uprisings of minorities. And those of us who have covered these sort of stories for a number of years, I know you have, many people have, we have now recognized that there is a very comfortable hypocrisy, to be quite frank, when it comes to how you handle citizens who are protesting, and when those protests become violent, what happens? Yeah. So while I am saddened by today's events, I am not shocked by today's events. I'm actually more shocked by the members of Congress who are feigning shock over what transpired more than anything that happened in the Capitol today.
And Tara and Heidi, to that point, how much blame do you place on President Trump for today's events? Since he lost, he's been disseminating disinformation and conspiracy theories. Tara, you can go first.
Well, I would say that Donald Trump has been telegraphing his intent here to leave office with scorched earth behind him for quite some time. To LZ's point, we shouldn't be shocked. It's unfortunate, but he has been aided and abetted by a lot of people, including these seditious senators in Congress who poured gasoline on the fire that Donald Trump lit. And it's shameful and un-American the way in which some of these elected officials have behaved, perpetuating these conspiracy theories and unfounded accusations of widespread election fraud, further sowing discord and distrust with the American people about the free and fair elections that just took place. That is what's led to this. Donald Trump did not do this by himself. He bears a lot of responsibility. There was bloodshed today in the Capitol, which is shameful. A lot of people that have blood on their hands that led up to this, and I think there needs to be a considerable reckoning within the Republican Party about the role that they've played collaborating in this seditious act today.
Heidi, you served in that great hall. Many of the men and women in the Senate and the Congress today, those are your colleagues, your friends. Your take on today and what responsibility you lay at the feet of President Trump?
Listen, I think President Trump is a symptom of a huge problem that we have in this country, a huge division, much of it based on race. He started out tapping into that very early on in his presidential run, the call and response, lock them up, build the wall, send them back. And we heard it over and over again, and it worked for him. It gave him power. Unfortunately, all the people in Congress who have enabled this have created the conditions that led to today. You know, it's interesting. Mitch McConnell said, I want everybody to understand that what you're doing today in voting to not approve the Electoral College is not a harmless protest gesture. Guess what? It was not a harmless protest gesture. And all of those people who changed their mind, the Constitution did not change today. The law did not change. The facts did not change. But they realized that what they were doing was harming our democracy. It's unfortunate that they realized this 14 days before he leaves office.
My friends, we have about a minute left. Elsie, this question to you. Today we saw images of protesters infiltrating the rotunda, flying Confederate flags. On the Georgia State Capitol, after it elected its first black senator, we saw a Confederate flag waving. What does this say about our country?
It says that in a lot of ways we haven't changed. And it is unfortunate because there's a lot of good that have happened over the decades, particularly over the course of this summer, in the summer of racial reconciliation, if you will. A lot of corporations and sports leagues and sports teams have used their platforms and their resources to try to make this world a better place. But with that being said, until we can agree on the basic facts, we're always going to have this division. You called it a Confederate flag. I think that is a flag of treason. You ask someone else, they say, hey, it's just my heritage. If we can't even agree on the facts, we're going to have a very hard time getting past these issues that have really handcuffed us since this founding.
Heidi, quickly, one word for you to describe today.
Sad. I mean, I think that our democracy has been in peril for the last 4 years and probably longer before that, and it came to a head today. And I'm hopeful that we've learned something from it. So sad, but hopeful.
Indeed. Thank you all. Coming up, the other big headline today, the Democrats taking control of Congress. What this means for the Biden administration.
As the Capitol was erupting in chaos today, there was another historic moment.
The shift in power in Washington, Democrats projected to win the high-stakes runoffs in Georgia and take control of the U.S. Senate. As the unimaginable images from D.C. roiled on, it was easy to bypass the history that rose out of the Deep South.
I am going to the Senate to work for all of Georgia.
I'll be for you in the U.S. Senate. I will serve all the people of the state.
John Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock clinching the Senate for the Democrats with their projected wins in Georgia. The first time politicians overcoming difficult odds to defeat incumbent Senator Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. Neither conceded yet.
We have a path to victory, and we're staying on it.
The victory, a moment of resurrection for documentary filmmaker Ossoff, who ran for Congress back in 2017 and lost. But Warnock's projected win makes him Georgia's first black U.S. Senator and only the 11th black person ever elected to the Senate. For the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, one of the most historic churches in America, this win, so much bigger than one man.
My mother, who as a teenager growing up in Waycross, Georgia, used to pick somebody else's cotton. But the other day, because this is America, the 82-year-old hands that used to pick somebody else's cotton went to the polls and picked her youngest son to be a United States Senator.
Warnick's win immediately inspiring younger generations of black men like 24-year-old Julius Thomas.
We proved that black voters are no longer sitting on the sidelines. We are in the game. This completely planted a seed of belief, hope, and faith all together to let us know that we are a part of this country, a part of this nation.
The upsets now make Democrats the majority, giving them control of the Senate, the House, and the White House, a major boon for the incoming Biden-Harris administration. And as the president continues to falsely claim Georgia was stolen from him, Julius Thomas thinks it's important that the country finally move forward.
The beauty of the United States of America is the diversity, not just in race, but in thought as well. So I think it's very important that Democrats and Republicans continue to listen to each other, respect each other's values, and see if there's a way to move forward.
Like many of our American ideals, unity can be elusive, perhaps more essential now than ever before.
A new chapter in American history. So, Juju, we have a Jewish man and a black man, 2 U.S. senators in what was the Old South.
Absolutely. And as a Jewish American, as an African American, we have a lot of history to reflect on, and who better to reflect on history than you, my friend Byron. You asked LZ about his reaction to the Confederate flag being waved by the agitator in the Capitol. I'm curious what your thoughts were.
It was said, Elijah Cummings, Congressman Elijah Cummings from my hometown of Baltimore said a couple of years ago, we are better than this. America gave its verdict on the Confederate flag a few years ago. Just last year, a poll came out and said most Americans consider that a symbol of racism. But Juju, you and I are both, the cup is half full people, right?
Absolutely.
And so I want to believe that potentially today might have been our generation's Edmund Pettus moment, that the racial political divide today may have been a bridge over that for people.
Absolutely.
How do
and
you
you know, I had a moment where one of my sons called me and said, what do you think, Mom? And I said, this is not okay. This is not America, and hopefully democracy will prevail. But I have to say, that is Nightline for tonight. Stay with ABC News Live for continuing coverage. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Same time, I'm Juju Chang.
Good to be with you, my friend. I'm Byron Pitts. Thanks for the company, America. Good night.